You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 18th of October 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Ahead on today's programme, we'll examine the increasing tension between North and South Korea and Pyongyang's closer military connections to Russia. Then...
Oh, you guys are at the wrong rally. No, I think you meant to go to the smaller one down the street.
That's Kamala Harris reacting to hecklers at a rally in Wisconsin. We'll hear about the latest developments from the US as the election draws ever closer. Then...
Look, this referendum, in my view, is premature. In my view, this referendum we need to have after the negotiations.
We'll get an update on the referendum and election in Moldova. We'll have a roundup of business news. And finally, we'll cross to Art Basel in Paris to focus on a Moroccan gallery setting up shop there. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Georgina Godwin. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has described South Korea as a foreign and hostile nation. This comes apparently a day after the constitution was amended to drop unification of the two countries as a goal. There are also reports of North Korean troops being deployed to Ukraine to fight alongside Russian soldiers. Well, John Everard was formerly the British ambassador to Pyongyang, and he joins me now in the studio. John, what has Kim Jong-un said with regard to the South?
There's a long history here. Way back in December, the party plenum, declared that South Korea was no longer a brotherly nation with whom you could do dialogue and with whom you would strive for reunification of the Korean people. It was now a separate and hostile state. And Kim Jong-un, in a major speech in January this year, reiterated that and called for changes to the constitution. Now, the way you change the constitution in North Korea is the Supreme People's Assembly meets, deliberates, and passes resolution to that effect. The Supreme People's Assembly, sure enough, met a couple of weeks ago, but nothing was announced. And strangely, Kim Jong-un didn't actually address the Supreme People's Assembly, which suggests that the going wasn't entirely smooth. We've now got this rather oblique reference by North Korean state media to a change in the constitution, suggesting that something's gone through, but nobody's actually seen it yet, and the constitution itself hasn't been published. You do get the sense that Kim Jong-un is engaged in a bit of a turf war internally. North Korea, we always think of as a rock-solid dictatorship. It's not. There are internal battles, internal debates, and the fact that he didn't even address the Supreme People's Assembly suggests that people are pushing back. The idea of dropping reunification will be deeply unpopular in North Korea. It's the one thing that all the North Koreans I knew could agree on. If you reunify, you become rich, your standard of living rises enormously, you become free. What's not to like? Yes, we'll go for it. And now Kim Jong-un has taken that prize away from them.
And why? What has prompted this?
He's frightened of the South. For Kim Jong-un, the South Korea, with its tremendously successful economy, many, many times larger and more productive than that of the North, its seductive culture, even K-pop, which I hate, but which goes down very well in North Korea, is an existential threat. He has to explain to his people why he shouldn't simply step aside, let South Korea come in, run the country, and almost certainly run it a great deal better than he is. So he wants to cut off all possible contact with South Korea, bans its culture, bans its influence. It's not just the political denomination of South Korea now as a hostile state. It's things like the anti-counter-revolutionary thought law, which means that if you speak in a South Korean accent, you can be in prison for that now in Pyongyang.
Which is extraordinary. What actual action has been taken between the two?
Not a great deal. Essentially, since 2018, the great love-in, former President Moon Jae-in of South Korea crossing the DMZ, shaking Kim Jong-un's hand, there's been very little contact between North and South Korea. There are hotlines which the South tests religiously every day, and South Koreans tell me the North simply doesn't pick up anymore, so they've effectively been cut. Kim Jong-un, reliant now on aid from Russia, aid and trade, of course, he's supplying a lot of munitions for Russia's war effort in Ukraine, is decided he doesn't actually need reunification economically either. So he's isolating his country even more than it has been.
No, it seems he's not just supplying weapons to Russia. He may well be supplying troops on the ground. What do we know about that?
We don't know a great deal. The conservative South Korean papers a couple of days ago reported that 18 North Korean soldiers deserted, fighting in the Kursk region of occupied Russia, where of course, the Ukrainians have made an incursion. We don't know how accurate that is, and there's been not much collaboration. There's also talk of several thousand North Korean troops being trained by the Russians. If this is the case, and there's a lot of froth around, it's more likely that they'll be sent to operational areas in the rear rather than the front line. Thus, of course, freeing up Russian troops from the rear to go to the front line rather than being put into direct combat with Ukrainians themselves. Now, the Ukrainians have already started to talk about the axis between Russia and North Korea. And remember, the two countries signed effectively a military alliance last year. That the North Koreans are effectively part of the criminal conspiracy against Ukraine. And you'll remember that just a couple of weeks ago, somebody sent drones over Pyongyang itself, on 3 separate occasions, dropping leaflets. Now, everybody has been assuming that that was the South Koreans in one form or another. But it was a military drone. You can see that from the pictures that the North Koreans have circulated. So not an NGO, somebody with access to serious military equipment. And the drone was launched not from South Korea, but from a boat off the shore. And the whispers going around, this was Ukraine. We'll see.
What did the leaflets say?
They have rather nasty pictures of Kim Jong-un. Doing a nice picture of Kim Jong-un is actually quite difficult, but these were nasty ones, pointing out that he is wearing the very latest fashion, accompanied by his 9-year-old daughter with her Prada little girl's handbag, while the rest of the country starves. It tells North Koreans how much rice you can buy on a South Korean salary as compared to the amount of rice you can buy on a North Korean salary. They're quite powerful leaflets.
So, I mean, in conclusion, John, it looks like all is not well within the state. There are clearly some disagreements, and that this may well be a new axis opening up in the war if Ukraine is actually flying drones over North Korea.
Yes, if it was indeed Ukraine, that's a major development. Yes, all is not well at the top of North Korea. I mean, for heaven's sake, we have a grossly overweight leader, red in the face, puffing all the time, gasping for breath, said a recent defector, who insists on being accompanied by a 9-year-old daughter. This is just bizarre. All is not well. The economy is in a state of not quite near collapse, but it's in a very bad state. And the country remains entirely reliant on Russia. When the Ukraine war ends, Russia will drop North Korea like a hot potato. And then what does North Korea do?
John, thank you very much indeed. That was John Everard, formerly the British ambassador to North Korea. Now, here's Anita Riata with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Georgina. President Biden is renewing efforts to secure a ceasefire after Israeli forces killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar yesterday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, however, promised to continue with his country's wars in Gaza and Lebanon. The U.S. has charged an Indian intelligence officer with attempting to orchestrate the assassination of a political activist on American soil. The U.S. has worked with Canada to investigate what the two countries allege is the Indian government's campaign against Sikh separatists. Kenya's President William Ruto has nominated the country's interior minister to be his new deputy. The appointment comes just hours after the Senate impeached his former deputy amid mass protests in Kenya. Thanks, Georgina. Back to you.
Thank you, Anita. Now, it's less than 3 weeks before the US election and the campaigns and the mudslinging are in full force. Scott Lucas is an adjunct professor at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin, and joins me now. Scott, the US President Joe Biden arrived in Germany on Thursday night. What's the purpose of this visit?
Well, away from the U.S. election, Georgina, there's a very important purpose here, which is connected with your previous item about the Ukraine war, specifically Russia's invasion. There was the cancellation of a recent international summit to discuss support for Ukraine because of Biden dealing with the hurricanes in the United States. There needs to be a very public show that the United States has not forgotten that Ukraine is important. There are critical issues right now about whether or not the U.S. and Germany will give permission for long-range Ukraine strikes inside Russia. And in the past 48 hours, Vladimir Zelensky has presented his victory plan to finally defeat the 32-month Russian invasion. That will need also to be discussed between the two leaders.
Now, he was also meant to go to Angola this week, but the hurricanes put paid to that too. He plans to reschedule before his term ends. Why is it important for Biden to go there? We can see why he needs to be in Berlin, but Angola?
I think it's a marker of the fact that the United States still has an interest in Africa. Georgina, I think quite often Africa tends to be an afterthought, certainly in terms of U.S. media coverage and indeed much international media coverage. We've got serious issues in the continent, whether you talk about immediate issues, turmoil in Sudan, for example, the ongoing deadly conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've got other issues that concern the entire continent, such as climate change, such as health issues, including coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've got a competition in Africa where the Chinese want to increase their influence there. The Russians would like to increase their influence there. The Gulf states would like to increase their influence. So this is a marker that the United States is simply not stepping aside from the continent.
Let's have a look at the campaign trail. What are the Democrats up to? We heard a little clip earlier of Kamala really kind of riling up Trump supporters, telling them when they heckled her that they ought to be at the smaller rally down the street. She's also accused Trump of gaslighting Americans re the January the 6th incident.
Well, I think let's take that last point, because that's not just simply that Trump is gaslighting Americans about what happened when he says, oh, it was just simply a day of love. A strange way to describe an attack on the U.S. Capitol and threats to execute lawmakers and indeed Trump's own Vice President Mike Pence. Harris is trying to highlight in these last weeks of the campaign that Donald Trump is a serious threat, not just on specific issues. Think about women's rights, for example, but he is a threat to the entire U.S. system. She is highlighting the fact, which is yes, he tried to pursue a coup attempt less than 4 years ago, and that far from acknowledging his loss in 2020, both Donald Trump and his vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, still say he did not lose. And indeed, that there is a plan out there, a Trump blueprint to politicize all U.S. agencies, so that he effectively can either break those agencies or make them bend to his will.
What are the latest polls saying?
You've got 7 swing states that determine this election, Georgina. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan in the Rust Belt, in the Sun Belt, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina. Each of those 7 states is within 1.5% between the two candidates. And indeed, 5 of those 7 states is within 1%. That's how narrow the margin is right now, with only, 19 days to go.
So what's going to decide this election?
I think it's turnout. I can take you through all the important issues that are there, whether we talk about healthcare, women's rights, whether we talk about the economy, immigration, the threat to democracy, foreign policy. I can tell you how the U.S. media is failing to cover those issues, and they tend to cover Trump's spectacle instead. But the fundamental is, in 2016, Democrats did not get their people out to the polls. That's why Donald Trump was able to win narrowly. In 2020, the Democrats did get voters out, especially young voters and women voters and suburban voters. That's why they won. It is a question as to which side mobilizes people, something that the polls can't tell you. We will not know until that day who actually has the better ground game and the more committed people behind them.
But Scott, there's a scenario where Trump wins or loses the popular vote and the opposite happens for the Electoral College.
It's happened twice in the last 6 years. I mean, it happened in 2000 that the Democrat Al Gore won the popular vote, but lost to the Republican George W. Bush. And of course, it happened in 2016. Hillary Clinton won by more than 3 million popular votes, which is why Trump still says that election was rigged, even though he won the Electoral College. And yes, there is probably about a 20 to 25% likelihood on all the modeling that Kamala Harris could win the popular vote. But Donald Trump, because he won't win California, the Democrats will win that by 20%, or New York by 20%. He'll win some states by much narrower margins, and therefore win the Electoral College.
Scott, I just have to ask this question before you go. Given that it's so close, we're looking at least, or thereabouts, half of America supporting Donald Trump. What happens if he loses? They're not going to accept that. He's not going to accept that. And how does Harris then go on to rule such a divided country?
Well, a lot of Trump votes probably would accept this. I mean, people don't necessarily just follow Trump because of the cult of personality. They have their own issues, and they do believe in the U.S. system. But let us be very clear here. Donald Trump does not believe in the U.S. system. If Donald Trump loses this election, well, let's just repeat the words that his supervisor of elections put out in November 2020, something we found out in the recent court filing by the special prosecutor, Jack Smith. Make them riot. Donald Trump called people out to try to stop the steal. He called people out, even if he didn't say go attack the Capitol. He called on them to stop the transfer of power in 2021 to Joe Biden. And he will call people out on the streets to protest, he'll say, but possibly be violent again. The immediate question is, can the American system withstand that? And the broader question is, if Kamala Harris wins, she has to be a president for all Americans. She has to recognize their concerns. She has to recognize the concerns of Trump voters, but she has to say firmly to them and to all Americans, this is a country with a rule of law, with a constitution. This is not a country which serves the whims of Donald John Trump.
Scott Lucas, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. The Moldovan presidential election this weekend will be the first vote held since the European Commission began accession negotiations with Chisinau. This polling will be a litmus test for the attitudes of citizens and a pivotal moment in the country's democracy. Andrew Muller sat down with one of the candidates, former Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Năstase, to find out more about his policies. Andrew began by asking Năstase, who was a target of the Russian mafia after exposing corruption, why he doesn't think his ex-colleague Maia Sandu should get a second term.
We were the partners with Maia Sandu and her party. Me and my colleagues, we began the fight, anti-corruption fight in Moldova in 2010, 2011, 12, and after the elections in 2020, we all citizens from Moldova, we believe that Maia Sandu party will continue our objectives. But unfortunately, they didn't deliver things that we are waiting for.
Is this specifically in terms of combating corruption?
Yes. Combating corruptions or reforms or economy or a level of life of people.
In terms of corruption in particular, which I do understand has been a problem in Moldova, is there anything specific that you don't think has been done that should be done, something you would do differently?
Okay, I will give you just one example. In 2019, in my period, when I was Minister of Internal Affairs, I put the contrabanda on the low level, historical low level. Now contrabanda is growing plus 50% in 2024 than in 2023.
By contraband, this is unlicensed imports coming into the country? What do you mean by that?
Export, in special cigarettes for your country is not good because you lose money. Also, in 2019, I depoliticized Minister of Internal Affairs. Now that structures is politicate. It's not good because they don't work for people. They don't work for country. They work for political party and for one person.
That problem you're talking about with contraband, is it linked to Transnistria? This is the territory of Moldova which has been controlled for quite a long time by a pro-Russian, Russian-supported separatist regime. Is this where you see the heart of the problem?
Yes, because we don't control 400 kilometers. De jure, is Moldovan territory, but de facto is under control Russians and local oligarchs.
Do you think that is a solvable problem? Certainly the regime in Tiraspol, Transnistria's capital, do not seem very compromising. They passed a law this week actually banning use of the word Transnistria in Transnistria, which they think is apparently a manifestation of Nazism. Is there a plausible way, you think, that the territory can be reintegrated into Moldova?
It's not so easy. Is very difficult, and in last time is more difficult with the war in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. In my view, alone Moldova cannot solve this problem. We can solve problem just together with our partners, with our allies, and on the diplomatical way. But for that, we need to put together all efforts, all energies.
On the subject of partners, actual and potential, there's also going to be this referendum in Moldova on EU membership and the idea of continuing to work towards EU membership. You are in favour of that, and so is President Sandu. But the last poll I saw said that yes vote somewhere around 53%, which would be giving people here in the United Kingdom nervous memories. Do you think there's any doubt about that result?
Look, this referendum, in my view, is premature. In my view, this referendum we need to have after the negotiations, when our people will know effects of integration, will know risks, will know all about integration. And first of all, we need have, before the referendum, we need to have a large consensus, political and social consensus. But now this referendum is used by actual president and her party in their interest, not in people interest, not in country interest.
And you also do have in Moldova a lot of pro-Russian interests working against this vote. But I wanted to ask about that. It's clear that Russia does spend a lot of money and a lot of effort in trying to destabilize Moldova, but why do you think it is that there is still in Moldova an audience for the Russian narrative, not just in Transnistria, but in Gagauzia as well? There are Moldovans who are still receptive to the Russian line. Why do you think that is?
We know that the Russians have the interest in Moldova, in Transnistria, in region, in the world. But in my view, we need to construct strong institutes. Mm-hmm. Institutes that will be in the capacity to fight against interference and against influences from Russia.
One final question, because it is something that I have been curious about as Moldova tries to figure out the next way forward. Obviously, applying to the EU was a big step for Moldova, but do you imagine it's possible that Moldova might take that other big step towards NATO, which would, of course, mean rewriting Article 11 of your constitution, which commits Moldova to neutrality? Do you think it's important that Moldova keeps that, or would you be open to Moldova joining a defensive alliance like NATO?
Look, now we have a constitution. Me, like a candidate in on the presidential election, I need to respect constitution and opinion of our people. Mm-hmm. And we have a good partnership with the NATO through different directions, and we need stronger this partnership. In the same time, we need to respect our constitution and opinion and of our people.
That was the former Deputy Prime Minister of Moldova, Andrei Năstase, speaking to Andrew Muller. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. 12:24 here in London. Isabel Hamilton, senior reporter at the Daily Upside, joins me now with the latest business news. Isabel, we'll begin with Netflix. Their earnings show that it's leaving behind its growth phase. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Netflix reported its most profitable quarter ever earlier today. And what it does show is that there's a slowdown in the growth of subscriber numbers. Now, normally in days gone by, investors would have absolutely hated that news. now, however, it doesn't really matter because Netflix is sort of getting out of that initial life cycle that lots of tech startups use, which is just chasing growth endlessly, and it's starting to just turn towards profitability, and that's actually what the market is responding to pretty well.
And it's sort of changed the way it works too. I mean, advertising is now responsible for some of that income.
Yeah, they're starting to see this sort of momentum pick up in their ad-supported tier. You know, Netflix brought in this new, cheaper subscription that you can buy, but you have to watch ads, and that's where they see more revenue coming in the future. They've also said they're going to try and get some more money out of their gaming division, which is still pretty small. So we'll have to see how that develops.
Let's have a look at oil now. It's steadying, but it's not going up.
Yeah, so oil has had a really, really big weekly loss. I think it's possibly the biggest in over a month. And so this week, we saw the International Energy Agency come out with a report, its outlook for the entire year, where it said not only does it see fossil fuel demand peaking before 2030, which it said before, it said that it actually predicts we'll see fossil fuel surpluses kind of sloshing around, barring any major geopolitical events kind of upsetting things. And the IEA has been at odds with oil producers and exporters like OPEC and the big oil companies all year on sort of predicting where demand's going to go. And it seems like now sort of it's starting to win the fight a bit because OPEC trimmed its demand forecast as well this week. So yeah, oil, it's sort of coming down.
And finally, let's have a look at Elon Musk and the fact that the EU might regulate X by taking his other private companies into account.
Yeah, so this is a report from a couple of places, actually. I think I saw it in Bloomberg and the Financial Times, that there are officials at the EU who are considering lumping X's, used to be Twitter's, revenue in with all the revenue that Musk's other companies, his private companies, I should say, make when they're calculating fines. Because when the EU fines a company, they do it as a percentage of its annual revenue, like its turnover. But X's revenue is pretty small, probably. In fact, X recently convinced the EU, with regards to another set of legislation, that it's actually too small to count as a big tech company, and the EU agreed. So this would be a kind of sleight of hand from EU lawmakers to say, yes, okay, X isn't that big, but the guy behind it is pretty big.
Isabel, thank you. Very interesting indeed. Isabel's a senior reporter at The Daily Upside. Today marks the first public day of Art Basel Paris. Amongst the almost 200 galleries setting up shop under the ornate ceiling of the Grand Palais, there are a number making their debut in Paris. One such organisation is Loft Art Gallery. It's the first time they've exhibited at the fair, but they're also the first Moroccan gallery to do so. Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs sat down with co-founder and director Yasmin Barada to find out about the significance of the moment for them.
This is a very important step for the life of the gallery to be here in Art Basel to exhibit for the first time. I think for the life of the gallery it's a milestone, but it's also a real pride for us as Moroccan to represent Morocco for the first time in a so prestigious event and contemporary art event.
And it's important for Morocco, as you say. Could you tell me a little bit about the contemporary art scene in Morocco and North Africa more widely, and does this feel like a particularly kind of special moment?
The art scene in Morocco is very interesting, and when we started 15 years ago, the Moroccan art scene was very local, and I would say that collectors from outside didn't buy a lot Moroccan artists, and vice versa, as Moroccan and as Moroccan galleries didn't exhibit artists from outside Morocco. But I have to say that things changed a lot, because now there is a real dialogue and bridges between the Moroccan art scene and other countries, and especially I think the work we are doing is really to create this bridge between Moroccan artists, African artists and its diaspora, and the Occidental world. As I like to say, there are much more things that put us together, and there are a lot of common stories to tell together.
And how important are art fairs for doing that? Not just Art Basel Paris, but in general, how important are art fairs for galleries such as yours?
It's very important for a gallery to start to exhibit outside its country, because it's the better way, to show the art and the culture of the country outside, and to promote its artists to collectors, international collectors, to museums, to institutions, and all these things together build, a better knowledge of the local art scene.
We're sitting here surrounded by some really gorgeous artworks. Can you tell me a little bit about them and why you decided to bring them with you for this fair?
Yeah, as the first participation, we decided to show the work of Ahmed Melihi, which is one of the most important artist in Morocco and a pioneer of the modern art in Morocco. He founded with Mohammed, with Belkahia, Sheb'a and others, the group of Casablanca School, which is well known now. And we wanted to do this retrospective of his work as we worked with him for more than 10 years, and it was very important because he was one of our most important artists, but he was also a friend, and he always brings us luck. So we thought that it was very important to show him for the first time here, and it was the case this time also. He brought us luck.
Let's talk a little bit more about that luck. Obviously, you are here to connect with other galleries and people and the art world in general, but you're also here for sales. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about the kind of depressed art market. And I wonder how you think about that and how the fair has been in terms of your sales so far.
The fair has been very well since now. It's the second day now. So I think we are very happy about this. But as you said, it's not only about sales, it's also about the welcoming of the public. And I have to know that the welcoming for us as a first Moroccan gallery, as a gallery showing this amazing artist Melihi, was fabulous. We had a lot of interest, a lot of connection with people in institutions all over the world, big collections, big private collections, and we have also a lot of interest of the press, French press, but also international press. And that's a very good point.
One final question. What and where next for Loft Art Gallery? I assume you will hope to come back to Art Basel Paris next year, but what else do you have in the pipeline and what are you really excited about at the moment?
You know what? I would say that the best stories are those who are constructed slowly, days after days. And for the moment, I just leave this presence in Art Basel, all this success, all this love we are receiving. And I would say that I want to consolidate this. I want to consolidate the relation with the institution, with our collectors. I want to consolidate this place in Art Basel and keep going slowly but surely.
Yasmin Barada there from Loft Art Gallery speaking to our Sophie Monaghan-Coombs. Art Basel Paris continues until the end of the weekend. And that's all for this edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Anita Riotta. Our researchers were Gunnar Grinlid and Sana Jamani, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Georgina Godwin. Goodbye and thanks for listening.